Hello, everybody. Welcome to my next movie review. Um, I've got actually quite a few to do this time around, and believe it or not, you're actually in to actually, get a bunch in this time with me. The first movie review I want to talk about is the movie Ouija or Ouija, Ouija. It's about the board game. Tony and I rented this movie from the Red Box last night. You know those like standalone, movie rental things. And we watched it when we got back home from being out. For starters, the title should have been called "Why Not to Play with a Ouija." The reason I say that the title should have been changed is because it shows what happens when a group of teenagers get together in their recently deceased friend's house to play with a Ouija board and attempted to contact the deceased friends that had done the old rope dance in the house after the girl who had committed the suicide had played with a Ouija board in the same house. Of course, this is after the girl's parents or parent leaves the house to get away from the situation for a while as well, shortly after the movie starts and the girl commits suicide. So, the house is basically vacant throughout the majority of the house. Prior to the girl committing suicide, the girl had ran up the stairs like she had heard somebody upstairs that was moving around inside of the house that the girl was basically alone in at the time. When she started going up the stairs, I looked at my husband, Tony, and said, "Before you die, you see the ring." And we started laughing hysterically. In case you don't know what that's a reference to the Naomi Watts movie, The Ring. Yeah. When the girl after I made that comment and the girl ran up the stairs, Tony looked at me and said, "Why do these dumb girls always seem to want to run up the stairs instead of running outside to like a waiting car or something and then they leave?" I replied, that's because it would make sense, Tony, and it would make for a good horror story of sorts if they ran outside and saved themselves and not get killed by the murderer or whatever. As the movie progresses, though, the things begin to happen to the friends that played with the Ouija board inside the deceased girl's house after the fact. Some of the friends have accidents of sorts and then die from said accidents. I'm not going to divulge here how the movie ends because the ending itself is just so cheesy, as is the whole movie for both Tony and myself, that ruining the ending isn't even worth it for me with this movie. Outside of what I've just said here so far, I have some things that I'd like to discuss in relation to some of the stuff that the characters said and did in the movie, including the first girl that hung herself in the movie. For starters, one thing that was discussed was just playing with the Ouija board in the first place. The first girl that died had said, even at the very beginning of the movie, to never play the thing alone or in a cemetery, to her friend that later tried to contact her with the Ouija board in the beyond. One thing that I can honestly say about playing a Ouija board in general, and as the anti-drug forces would tell you about doing drugs, is to just say no and don't play with the Ouija board in general. Just don't. Do yourself a favor, okay? I've heard of instances from people that I have talked to and come in contact with over the years that have told me that they have played with a Ouija board when they were younger and stuff, and have had things happen to them that weren't good by any stretch of the imagination. Like, they a couple hours later stood up and like their legs gave out and they broke their knees, or they fell down a flight of steps. It felt like somebody pushed them and they ended up breaking a hip. It's like they have like all these kind of like bone breaking, like car accidents that, it's like, this mysterious car comes up and they don't find the car that wrecked into them, because the person, disappeared, and it's like they never can explain it, but there's like no car around, but you can tell somebody like ran into them and then left. You know, there's I've also seen on TV where even semi-famous ghost hunters type, people like Zach Baggins or Bagans or whatever his last name is, has said not to play with Ouija boards on his TV show Ghost Adventures. In fact, Zach's Crazy Tale made that very comment back in either 2013 or last year in 2014 at what's called the Exorcism House up there in Pennsylvania or New York State when Zach was there at the Exorcism House to do a show. I remember seeing the show quite well. I think I watched it off the DVR because Tony and I had to be somewhere that night, like right when the show was on, and I'm like, you know what, I'm DVRing it just because, well, this way I can watch it from the beginning, and if I need to get up and pause it, I can, if I gotta go potty or whatever, and that's how we are about, movies like Ouija, too. But what Zach did was he was up there like, yeah, don't ever do this at home and don't play with a Ouija board. You know what his dumb butt did? Is he's in the exorcism house, and the thing that caused, all the problems in the first place was the kid was playing with a Ouija board, and supposedly he got possessed, and they had to have this exorcism, and blah, blah, blah. Zach's Crazy Tale was in there playing with a Ouija board in the very room that this supposed stuff went on. Excuse me, I felt that coming. And the funniest part about that TV show, and it's related to this, I found myself yelling at the television. I'm like, Zach, why are you playing with a Ouija board? I'm like, it's like you're talking out both sides of your butt on that one. I can't even pretend to understand why someone feels the need to play with a Ouija board like the kids in this movie did on a few different occasions during the movie. And I know that messing around with something like a Ouija board could have potentially life-threatening or injurious stuff happen to him is not a good thing. Granted, this movie is, in my opinion, a step up from like the Scooby-Doo type, cartoons or whatever that you would like watch as a kid, for like 13 to 16-year-old kids that can't get into like what I would call a rated R movie, or is like, I guess they're still called NC-17 movies, without like an older friend, parent, or sibling to get them into the movie. Of course, that mentioned the PG-13 movies like this one, which Ouija is a PG-13 movie. These are a step down from the Blood and Guts, which I would consider a rated R movie, which is what they were called when I was 13 to 16 years old. And I still call them rated R's just because it's like, like I look at him and I would look at Tony and say, yeah, let's put in a rated R movie, a good, blood and guts thing. But, he would know what I meant. What I really think about this movie is so geared towards a younger teenage mind that I could see where a 13 to 15-year-old kid would probably be still freaked out by it, assuming they haven't gotten on like, on here on like YouTube or gone on like Facebook or somewhere and seen far grosser stuff. Like, I know on YouTube here somewhere, like they actually show real decapitations and real like drawn quartering and stuff. Tony showed me. I'm like, ew, really? Of course, there's also there's videos here on YouTube where it's like they talk about like urban legends, and namely like the Hook legend is the one that comes to mind for me. There's this movie Ouija, talks about, shows like what is considered acceptable behavior, like what you should do and what you shouldn't do in like a non-threatening, safe way for kids. So like to teach them like, like with the Hook, like, don't go out necking or, you could get killed kind of thing, but it's like, when I was a kid and I read the story of the Hook, and, Alvin Schwartz's books, which is what I grabbed down earlier. It just teaches you, like the right and wrong, what's acceptable in society. And Ouija, in a way, kind of, sort of, halfway shows that. I'm also reminded of two things with this movie, Ouija. There was a preacher I knew back in, I'd say, like 2012. I mean, this was a while ago, back when I went to church. I don't go anymore because, let's just say, I've grown cynical. But the preacher said that he had an older son. He had, 3 kids. He said that I think it was his older son, or it was one of the older 2. The youngest one was like 2, and was like too little to go anywhere except for like maybe to preschool or something. But one, like the oldest, or like the second oldest, or like the middle kid, got invited over to a friend's house, and the kid played like t-ball or soccer or football or something. And the friend wanted all his friends to get together and play with a Ouija board that night. And, what ended up happening is, it ended up, one, causing me to get on here on YouTube and shoot my whole Halloween series, the first one, on my main channel. And, it also got me and Tony talking about it. But, like Ouija boards and stuff like that. But he said, the preacher was like, he doesn't want his kids or anybody like he's friends with to play or use, a device of the devil, meaning a Ouija board. But of course, I'm not going to keep vlogging, like my other channel and stuff, but, I would like, to talk about my opinions of, Ouija board, like not related to this movie, but I want to save that for like a video on my other channel, on my main non-movie reviewer page here on YouTube. So in closing, I did want to say that the movie Ouija, or whatever you want to call it, was cheesy and not something I would recommend watching unless you, want to watch a really uber cheesy, non-bloody horror flick with a friend tonight, or, you want to give your, 13-year-old kid a good scare. Alright? So, thanks for watching, and hang on, I want to have more reviews to do. Alright? Hang on.